You might wonder why here in the 21st century we would want to use a good old-fashioned letter. Well, first of all, letters are very personal. They come from us and they're usually addressed to another person. So that might be one reason we choose a letter, whereas an email is or a memo might be more likely to be used for a mass communication. Letters are a little bit more formal than other kinds of communication, so they are used in more formal situations or situations where it's important to convey a professional impression, such as a job application cover letter. Letters also allow us to be an official representative of our company, business, or organization. Letters are often typed on official corporate letterhead, and that's a signal that this isn't just you writing an email to some other person, it's a signal that you are writing on behalf of your organization. Letters are usually a little longer than a typical email, and when they are, they allow you to present a more careful presentation of whatever information you need to convey, a little bit less off the cuff. Now that doesn't mean letters aren't also concise. Most letters do want to restrict themselves to one page, but it gives you a chance to slow down and carefully create what you want to say, and the recipient usually is going to read the letter more slowly than they would read an electronic communication. Letters are used when we are communicating with people outside our organization. Memos usually are within an organization, and emails can be both, but letters have, again, that sort of the formal, official representative quality that take your communication outside of your place of employment. And letters also serve a legal function. You may have noticed in certain situations you have to use a letter, say to cancel a credit card. You can't just do that over the phone. So in certain situations, letters provide that legal function, that official notice of something that needs to happen.
There are certain components that a letter needs to include to be considered usable. And some of these components will be seen in all letters that you write for this class. The first thing you'll see at the top of the page is the return address, which is your address as the sender of the letter. Underneath that is the date, spelled out, month, day, and year. The inside address is what we call the recipient's address. And in a business situation, if you're writing someone at their place of employment, you would include that organization, business, school, whatever that entity is as part of the address. That shows that you're writing the recipient not as a private citizen, but in his or her capacity as an employee of an organization. A salutation follows, and in business letters, we begin that salutation with dear. Dear Mr. Jones or Dear Ms. Smith. So it doesn't mean you're pledging undying love. We do say dear. If you're not sure whether the letter's recipient is male or female, you can always use their first and last name. Dear Chris Jones, for example. The body of the letter will be organized into paragraphs, and those paragraphs will also be spaced. A complimentary closing will say sincerely or perhaps yours truly or regards, whatever you choose among the standard complimentary closings appropriate for a business letter. And then we'll see your signature with your typed name underneath it. For this class, it's perfectly acceptable to use another font, maybe something that looks more like a signature, in lieu of actually signing and scanning your name into a document. You're welcome to do that if you want, but another font is just fine. Now, there are a lot of sample letters in our textbook, but sometimes the way they're described or maybe the variances in their presentation can be confusing. If so, please consult the sample letter that I have provided for you in Blackboard Learn. It's a letter that demonstrates the different parts of a basic letter. It demonstrates spacing, it demonstrates margins, and it has my little comments on the side that explain some of these elements. So be sure to take a look at that and let me know if you have any questions about anything.
There are also some elements that might appear in a letter as needed. So they won't be in every single letter, but they will be in some letters. An attention line is used when you are not using a salutation. An attention line often directs the letter to the attention of a particular department or a position when you don't know the name of the person that this letter might go to, or you don't really care whether it goes to a specific person. You just want to direct it, say, to the customer service department. The textbook will explain a little bit more about how to use and format an attention line. A subject line, as it suggests, indicates briefly what the letter is about. You don't usually use that in personal correspondence, but sometimes in business correspondence, especially if you're writing to a large company, a subject line will help direct the letter appropriately. Help it get to the person who is the relevant and affected party who can deal with whatever the subject is at hand. If someone else types your letter, then there need to be typist initials. For this class, however, you better do your own work. An enclosure notation is used anytime the letter conveys some other document. So for example, a job application cover letter usually conveys a resume. So you can expect to have an enclosure notation that says there's a resume as well. Anytime something is sent with a letter, you need an enclosure notation. A copy notation is like the CC line in an email. It's used when you've sent a copy of the letter to some other relevant and affected party. So perhaps the letter is directed to a client, but you have sent a copy to perhaps their supervisor or some other person who has an interest in the situation. If you don't send a copy of your letter to someone else, you don't need a copy notation. And lastly, a postscript, good old PS, not used very often in business communication, but it can be used on occasion. What are some other things to think about in regards to letters? Well, all technical communication is audience-oriented, and letters are no exception. Focus your letter on the person you're addressing in that salutation. If it says, "Dear Ms. Sanchez," think about what Ms. Sanchez needs to know. Have her in your mind as you create this letter. Make a human connection with the recipient of the letter. This is not something that's just going out and being read by another machine. Ms. Sanchez, or whoever the letter is addressed to, is going to read this. How can you forge a connection with her? Use plain English. A lot of people get really overly formal with letters. Letters are more formal than emails and a lot more formal than text messages, but you don't want to sound stuffy. You don't want to use what we call letterese. The party of the first part would like to convey to the party of the second part. No, I'd like to let you know. That's what we mean by plain English. And think about how the recipient will react. That's part of our general audience orientation. Are they likely to be upset by this news, happy about it? That will guide you in some choices that you'll need to make about what information to present and how to present that information. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the semester.
Perhaps you won't be surprised to hear now that your project this week involves you writing a one-page business letter. So here are the basic criteria for the assignment. You need to discuss your expectations for this class, your past experiences that prepare you for this class, the role of this class in your career and educational plans, and any questions you have about this class. And you'll notice there's a repeated phrase in every single one of those bullet points, and that phrase is this class. When you write a letter about yourself, there's a lot of information that you could include. You could include everything from your birth to what you had for breakfast this morning. But most of the things that you might discuss about your life aren't particularly relevant in light of this class. So make sure as you select the elements from your past, your present, and your plans for your future that you want to discuss, that they are all in light of this class. Make sure you do address all 4 points, and if you don't have any questions, then you simply need to say, "I don't have any questions at this time," and that will be fine. That'll count. The other thing you need to do is, while this letter should be brief, you're trying to fit it all onto one page, you do need to use specific detail to illustrate these different bullet points. So specific experiences you have had, details about your career plans and your educational plans, and to be concrete about your expectations. In a successful submission, I will see that you have correctly applied business letter format. Remember, you can always consult the sample I've posted here in Blackboard Learn for help with that. I'll see that your tone is professional and appropriate. That doesn't mean it's overly formal, but that it means that you're staying focused on what I, as your audience, needs to hear, and you are being professional. I'm seeing that you're showing awareness of my needs and interests, which you will do if everything is centered around your expectations, your experiences, your goals related to this class. Your letter will want to organize its content logically into paragraphs. So you're being asked to address 4 different pieces of information that might suggest one method of organization. There's no one right or wrong way to organize this letter, but I guarantee you if you throw everything into one paragraph, it will be wrong. You will want to use adequate detail, being specific about certain points, but you'll also want to be concise. So we're working on finding that balance.
For next week, there's a couple of chapters you need to read, and next week's lessons will be focusing on ideas of organization, editing, and the very important topic you've already heard a little about, concision. In the meantime, if you have any questions about this week's readings or this week's assignment, please post to the questions forum in Blackboard Learn.